The effort to salvage the 2015 Iran nuclear deal resumed in Vienna today, only to have the meeting end an hour after it started. While Russian officials say the meeting was constructive, they, along with the European Union, are voicing concerns about the negotiations. Last week, European officials called Iran's demands unrealistic and accused the nation of stalling to advance its nuclear program. The U.S. is sending a special envoy to Vienna this weekend. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also voiced concerns Iran could sink the latest round of discussions. In the meantime, the Biden administration is reportedly moving to tighten sanctions against Iran. To talk more about this is Behnam Ben Taleblu from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Behnam, welcome. Great to see you. So, as we mentioned, the Russian envoy called today's meeting short but productive. What was your takeaway from this meeting?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you again, Tanya. I think we're seeing a continuation of what we saw in round 7. The time, though we can't tell for sure, it's possible to infer that that short timeline is a continuation of that ultra-hardline Iranian position, where they're sticking to their hardline talking points, where they want sanctions relief first and up front. And ultimately, Iran's new ultra-hardline cabinet, led by the President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Abdullahian, and of course their Deputy Foreign Minister, who is negotiating in Vienna, Bagheri Khani, they're all representing this hardline position and talking about sanctions relief being first. So I'm sure there's issues of choreography up here, and I'm also sure there's issues of political signaling and who doesn't want to be the first mover.
And so by design, Behnam, the U.S. is letting others handle the bulk of the talks. Can you remind us why that is?
You know, in many sense, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And all throughout 2021, the U.S. was participating in these P5+1 negotiations with Iran indirectly in a separate room in Vienna, having the Europeans or other powers constantly shuttle back and forth. You had that in the 6 rounds from April to June. And of course, you had that rather prominently in the round that picked up on November 29th, which was the round when there was a new Iranian president at the helm. In this sense, the U.S., to borrow a phrase, is sitting at the children's table, is sitting at the kids' table. The Iranians want to cement this impression to, show the world that the superpower is now the supplicant, if you will. But they're all kind of dating the reason for this as that because the U.S. left the deal in May 2018 under the Trump administration. And despite a change in administration here in Washington and a change in Iran policy, Iran has not changed its behavior. In fact, it's pocketed concessions and forced Washington to sit on the sidelines.
And so has there been any progress made? Because last week, European leaders called Iran's demands unrealistic. Have they moved off of any of those demands at all?
It's too soon to tell if Iran has softened its position, if it ever does soften its position. This is something we should get across to viewers. Iran's ultra-hardline government, as well as its supreme leader, are vindicated right now. They don't believe that the West, despite some of these early signals and talking points by the Biden administration, can restore the pressure that existed under the Trump administration from 2018 to 2020. They believe the West is inherently uncomfortable with escalation, doesn't want to race against sanctions for centrifuges. So they believe they have a one-up, and that's one reason their hardline position is being underwritten in Vienna. The second, of course, is illicit oil sales to China have continued. So there actually is a financial incentive to remain firm there. So I'm a little bit skeptical, but if there is going to be a change a few days later, if the talks do continue, I'm sure that the West would interpret it as an off-ramp rather than a slight modification in Iran's position.
Okay, now another country that has a lot to say about all of this but is not sitting at the table is Israel, of course, who has held a firm stance that Iran cannot be trusted and the world community must do everything to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Is there any sort of deal at all that Israel would be on board with?
Oh, I'm sure there's multiple iterations of a deal that Israel would be on board with. The problem is Washington, based on what it's saying and what it's doing, seems to be oscillating between two very bad deal ideas. One is some kind of timeline for mutual compliance with that 2015 nuclear deal, which even the Biden administrations and even after 2017, the Europeans said did not go far enough and was not strong enough. Or worse, there's this potentially floated American position out there of an interim agreement of going to the 2013 deal where there's just a brief cap and there's a freeze for freeze and American pressure and a freeze in Iran's nuclear escalation. This, I think, is the worst of both worlds. Ultimately, a freeze could be useful to the Biden administration if it's looking to kind of be done with the region altogether and pivot. But that, I think, would be a strategic mistake, because you've seen the U.S. constantly get sucked back into conflict after conflict just when it thinks it's had enough and just when it thinks things are okay to push away from the table. So what does a good deal for Israelis look like? And what does a good deal for Americans look like and U.S. partners in the region look like? I think it's simple. Rather than a political promise by Iran, it's actually something material. It's dismantlement rather than putting some of these centrifuges into storage. It's down blending and shipping out the enriched uranium rather than promising it on a future timetable. It's actual moves rather than promises.
All right, we'll see if we ever get there. Well, Behnam Ben Taleblu, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you.